sexual energy is a real thing. A strictly platonic sort of merging experience doesn't have anything to do with sexual chemistry between two people, does it? I mean, that sounds like, I mean, you could have a merging experience with your pet cat, right? And I understand that there must be some component of that that's very ecstatic, and it has these, incredible elements, and is based around loving energy, which is great. And that's obviously a component of a relationship as well, like loving energy. But I also firmly believe that there is such a thing as sexual energy. And again, if you go into Tantra, I think that there would be a lot of concordance with this idea if you go into Tantric teachings. And I think What's up, everybody? This is Cyrus, and I don't usually do a post hoc analysis on interviews and things like that, but I've been thinking a lot about the interview with Karen Francis McCarthy, and I wanted to share some thoughts after I had a little while to sleep on it. And also I've been getting some feedback among some of you guys who have seen the interview. And it is a long interview, and I realize not everybody has been able to get through the whole thing, but some of you guys who have shared a few thoughts with me that I find I quite agree with. I wouldn't say it's completely like negative feedback, but things that kind of make you pause to question what you're hearing a little bit. What are the things, though, that I really liked about this interview and why I am happy with it? It's Karen had two really, really important points. One is that in tackling these misconceptions about life after death, she was hitting on the most important one of all, which is that we stay ourselves. We are who we are here, and we continue to grow. And she did it, she wonderfully sort of rebutted that, how do you call it, the holographic clone theory, or the facsimile theory, whatever you want to call it, that kind of lurks around the internet, the one that claims that our deceased loved ones are not really the deceased loved ones. They're these robotic clones or holographic interpretations or whatever. I mean, she did made some excellent points to further debunk that idea. And as well as I think making some really good points about a very controversial subject, of course, which is suicide. And so again, I think it's very, very helpful for people to hear these thoughts, as well as just the overarching concept that we stay who we are. We don't become instantly enlightened. We don't become something less than we were. We don't get cast into hell, but we don't become like these omniscient entities. Our personality is who we are from one moment that we're here in this realm, in this 3D Earth plane, to suddenly realizing that we're in this other plane. When we die, it's a very normal thing. So like one moment we're here, and then the next moment we're there, and we're like, oh, well, that's interesting. Look where I am now. And then life just kind of goes on, and that's what we learn from from many mediums and many independent sources of information about what it's like when we actually die. And so that's all great. And then the next thing that I quite agree with is sort of this objective journalist point of view, which is that we can't make definitive statements about what the other side is like unless we somehow have access to all of the information. And unless we're actually dead, then we may not have access. So we can't say for certain this is the way it is. And I agree with that. And all I can do is make theories based upon my experiences and the research I do, especially my experiences. And then those theories, they may or may not be true, but at least I can say with some level of confidence that there's a very, very high likelihood that it's true. And that's how it is with everything, including in this life. So there's a theory of gravity. I mean, I think gravity is true, But also, I mean, we don't know for sure. Gravity may have some component or function that we haven't discovered yet. So the current theory of gravity holds up to what our standards are in this society, but that could change. And so we don't want to be fixed into one way of thinking, and all that's great. So I guess some of the issues that I might have had with this interview is that I didn't push back hard enough in certain points. I was pushing back, but I didn't want to make a hostile interview. You have to kind of grade the tone and the guests and figure out, what's the right mood, what's the right way to approach the topic. You don't want to make things hostile, like I just said. But the issue is kind of like, on one hand, she says this, but I also think that she was maybe breaking her own rule a little bit by making definitive statements that seem to rule other things out. Okay, so as many of you guys know, I'm not a big fan of sex negative spirituality, and this is something that a topic that I really introduced to her, because the title of her Salon article specifically is about sex. And then she talks amazingly about like these tantric interdimensional sexual experiences, which I've heard about before. I've experienced a little bit of it, not nearly as much as I think people who have a spouse on that side are maybe able to experience. And I do think it is part of their repertoire of things that we can do over there on a higher level of consciousness. So things we do here, we don't realize just how good it can get. Like things tend to get upgraded on that side. It's one of the things that makes the afterlife field so exciting. It's like, what's something you like here? Well, take that to the next level, make it even better, and then that's what it's like over there. And that's really great. But that being said, if you listen to her answers, you read between the lines, and this is something that I was pushing back against a bit when you listen to the interview. There seems to be a distancing from sex as in sexual energy. So sexual energy is a real thing. A strictly platonic sort of merging experience doesn't have anything to do with sexual chemistry between two people, does it? I mean, that sounds like, you could have a merging experience with your pet cat, right? And I understand that there must be some component of that that's very ecstatic, and it has these, incredible elements, and is based around loving energy, which is great. And that's obviously a component of a relationship as well, like loving energy. But I also firmly believe that there is such a thing as sexual energy. And again, if you go into Tantra, I think that there would be a lot of concordance with this idea if you go into tantric teachings. And I think it has to do with, it's not just me, this is actually ancient Indian teachings, ancient yogic teachings. I believe it has to do with the polarity of the universe, male, female, and yes, it even includes same-sex couples who can be representing different elements of that polarity, and then it creates that tension, and then that tension, like the penultimate goal is copulation, which is not this dirty material physical nasty thing, which is kind of implied by Karen. It's still part of a yet higher divine concept, which is the creation of a new form, of a new life being generated through the tension of the polarity of the universe, and that polarity is what creates the new things, new life. And it's like it's a small representation of something on like a bigger or more cosmic scale, right? Which is, I think, a pretty cool concept. So I'm very hesitant to brand anything, especially things that we draw so much meaning from in our lives here, as being of the earth, of being material, of being something that we shrug off and get rid of after we die because it's strictly a material concept. These are literally the same things that Karen was railing against when it comes to like medieval level afterlife myths or religious inspired afterlife myths. Well, this is one, Karen. I don't think that you are seeing that you're applying that same kind of religious standard. Okay, religions are based often, for example, Protestants in the West. I mean, there's a core element of Puritanism, which basically believes that we need to shrug anything off that isn't of God. So if it's not of God, then we can get rid of it. So this is why I made a few videos back about this spiritual Puritanism brigade. It's like there's no music in the afterlife, there's no sex, there's no food, nothing that we can personally derive enjoyment from with ourselves or other people. It's just only just serving God 24 hours a day. And this line of thinking came out of that. So it has nothing to do with the objective afterlife. It has to do with people's cultural interpretations that they're sticking to the afterlife. And so we learn that there really is an afterlife, and then we begin just like whitewashing it with all of our religious ideas. And then what the end result is, this product that starts getting fed to people in the form of books and articles, and people who take on spirituality or the afterlife as public speaking careers. They start feeding this out to everybody else, and then these ideas really propagate. Whereas in reality, we're not in a position to say that there's no such thing as sexual feelings, right? If we still have astral bodies, which are like clones of our bodies here, but are much better in operating in this energy-based physics, where you can alter things and change things with your mind, then it still means we still have that prototype body, which is still functioning in similar ways. This is why there have been so many reports, why I've personally experienced, for example, sex on the astral side, which I would say definitively is better than here, because there's just enough energetic or mental element or mental components to make up for like the things that are sometimes not so great about sex here, like well, I'm not going to get too explicit, right? But let's just say, sometimes sex here is not that great. And doing astral projection experiences, you'll find that there's some of those disadvantages they get made up for. And it's why I have personally found that people are so sexual on the other side. Because it's almost like the things that people are repressed about here, like they were not able to fully actualize this, or they lost their self-esteem as they got older and their looks faded. They go back to that side, and suddenly they can make themselves young and beautiful again, and then sexual again, and then this creates a very powerful energy, right? And then the next component of this is what I was touching on in the interview as well. Is like, are we going to throw romantic love under the bus? Because sexuality is a big part of that. So let's say boy meets girl, and yes, I'm trying to be politically incorrect, or boy meets boy or whatever, but just something I can relate to as a straight guy. Boy meets girl, you get a rush of all these emotions, and we can't just reduce them down to saying, oh, they're just chemicals in the brain, so they're material. As I talked about in a couple of videos back, even chemicals are energy systems. They also have a component in other dimensions. Same thing. There's nothing about those types of concepts which are inferior or something that we should shrug at. It's a mixture. When you maybe start falling in love with somebody, of like sexual desire, that polarity, and which is really, really intense, obviously, combined with like romantic love. It is this whole mixture of different components, and that's what makes it so great. Why do you think that romantic relationships are so represented in every single freaking song you hear on the radio, and every single film has a romantic interest? So are we just going to like throw all that out the window after we die, because we all have to live in this puritanical existence where you can't have sexual feelings with other people? It has to only be just pure loving merging? I don't think so. And so when I brought this up with Karen, I noticed that she went back to her original point, which is the really good point. Like, no, of course, because we're all the same. It's like, okay, so we're all the same. So why can't you just say that, okay, I'm sure that there's normal sexual experiences that people can have as well, but I prefer this kind of cosmic merging with my partner, which is great. And the reason this also bugs me is that, different people have different experiences, motivations, but a lot of the people, like a lot of the widowers I talk to who post on the group, who I know personally, who I've helped out with this information, they don't want to hear that there's no sexual feelings, because that's part of the whole experience when you're with a significant other. And it's not just merging, it's also getting kind of naughty. Okay, it's like sexual polarity. It's that whole component. We want to know that we still have access to that kind of thing. And also, a lot of people cross over who are single or they're not in a monogamous relationship, and they don't want to imagine that the whole magical experience of boy meets girl or girl meets boy disappears, and that we lose that component of our humanity. So her response is, yeah, we're all the same, in which case, okay, that means that sex is the same. Why can't you just say that sex can be the same, but I prefer it this way? Or your original point is we can't make any definitive statements, so maybe sex is the same as it is here, maybe it's not, we can't really say. So that, bothered me. And I guess that's all I can say about that subject. There's other things too that maybe I should have pushed back more on, more upon. I'm not calling anybody a moron. Don't you love those little English language quirks? More upon. Right at the end of the video, she was saying that there's no such thing as negative entities, which by implication means there's no such thing as negative realms. So I find this to be completely inaccurate. That's why my response was to get the book Deadly Departed by Jock Brockes. There's mediums who are very experienced, I dare say more experienced than Karen by a factor of 10, 20, 30, 40 years, astral projectors and esoteric researchers, and many people in these areas who have verified what I have also verified, which is that there is this negative spectrum. If you're a medium, what you're doing is you're receiving telepathic input from the other side, which you can train your mind to do it. You're working within a specific niche, which is people's passed away loved ones. And I think 99% of people, or 98% of people, they don't have issues with negative realms. They're not going to become negative entities or deal with that. So you're not going to directly receive input from this spectrum if you're just a regular old medium. So that's why she's assuming that there's no such thing as negative entities, because she hasn't looked down that rabbit hole, which I don't think it is a great rabbit hole to look down, because that's some pretty scary stuff. And if you're consoling people who have lost loved ones, they don't want to hear about hellish environments. And I don't blame her for not bringing that up. But we can't just say that they don't exist because you haven't seen it. So that's the actual fallacy here. That's the very thing that she's saying that she thinks is wrong in the afterlife community, is the same thing that she's now in this breath doing, which is saying that this doesn't exist because I haven't seen it. Well, I've seen some elements of this, and I can say it does exist. And there's really, really great authors out there like Jürgen Ziva who have been taken by guides into the lower spectrums and reported in detail exactly what it's like on that spectrum and how our psychological states can create these environments in often extreme cases. But it's a big world. There's billions of people. There's been enough extreme cases and murderers and terrorists and people who have created these types of environments on the other side. And take it into a step further, talking about archonic forces, higher dimensional negative entities, the Luciferian group soul, some pretty wild stuff. So no, it's not just us inventing. We're not inventing all of this to scare people or tell stories by the campfire. This is a real element of this field, and it's really being misrepresented by her statements. And so this leads to my kind of overarching issue, or the disagreement that I've I think I have is, on one hand, I do agree we need to be objective and we need to say that we can't make definitive answers and things have to be theories. But on the other hand, we don't want to take that to the point where we're in this subjective, wishy-washy environment where there's never going to be progress, there's never going to be understanding, there's never going to be knowledge about the nuts and bolts details of the other side. A lot of my work is predicated on the idea that we can put together nuts and bolts details about what to expect and what these other dimensions are like, because so much of it is super consistent. Mediumship is rarely going to get a completely consistent message because mediumship is telepathic communication via impressions. It's not direct communication. Direct communication can include, I hate to put one thing above another here, but let's face it, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and direct spirit communication. This includes trance channeling. So trance channeling is when there's actually a spirit speaking through you. It's not just receiving input, receiving impressions, receiving thoughts from the other side, which is actually something I do, in case you haven't noticed, listening to me talk or reading what I write. I still wouldn't call that direct at all. It's absolutely filtered through our own thoughts, our own brain, our own mind, and it's not a clear channel. And in many ways, the same can be said for a lot of mediums, mental mediums, that is. With direct spirit communication, you're getting from the lion's mouth about what they're doing over there and what their world is like, and that's what I focus on. I referenced Leslie Flint in my first book because Leslie Flint was a physical medium. You could say maybe trance medium, but the voices were not coming through his vocal cords. It was coming from his shoulder. So they actually built an apparatus to speak through. As hard as that is to believe, this was a verifiable paranormal phenomenon that was researched by investigators. And yeah, the voices kind of sound the same, and there's a couple of wonky issues with that. But the point remains is that voices were coming through his shoulder, not coming through his mouth. So it's the days before smartphones or even tape or even like little cassette recorders. I mean, this was in the 1950s and 1960s. On up into I think he stopped in the mid 80s. He passed away in 92, I think. The point is that when you go into the Leslie Flint tapes, there's many hours of spirits talking in a direct way through this guy's shoulder. There's not through his voice. Even if he was a trance medium, like going into trance, talking, blah blah blah, that would still be evidential if it was truly that they were speaking through him. But this was a step further. It was coming through an ectoplasmic voice box, which verified that it was supernatural. And so then we can take what they're saying, and that's how we can learn nuts and bolts information about what these other dimensions are like. And then lo and behold, that information happens to line up with everything else. It lines up with my out-of-body experiences and lines up with Jurgen's out-of-body experiences and lines up with a lot of near-death experiences, and it lines up with so many different areas, right? It lines up with what we hear about through electronic communication. So the point is that it's really consistent. We can say with a high level of certainty that X, Y, Z types of things happen when we die. There's no point in muddying the waters by saying that we can't know this until we're dead. There's no way to fully know any particular area of information and all of that. And so those are the areas that I have issues with on this interview, and I don't want to cause confusion among people watching the channel, so I felt like I needed to address this. Hopefully then this has helped clarify that and help us learn a few things. Overall though, I think it was a good interview, and I think the overall message about how we stay who we are after we cross over, and really where she's coming from, I think it's really solid. I think it's really good. And I think that the interview will do a lot to help people who have lost a spouse, especially, and they want to know that their spouse is still who they are, or who they were, not some extra dimensional, 11th dimensional cosmic entity. Now that Bob is still Bob, and John is still John, and Steve is still Steve, Sally is still Sally. Even if we're still evolving and progressing and growing into higher and higher levels, but we don't just die and become something else. And so these messages, what she was saying was really good stuff. I really agree with her, but where I disagree is actually just really common stuff. And so a lot of people kind of share her opinions, and I'm trying to push back a little bit on it because I'm trying to open things up to a wider scale of knowledge, so I don't hold it against her or anything. I think that some of these kind of misconceptions are just really, really common things, and it's not a big deal. Anyway, thanks for watching this. If you haven't subscribed yet, go down, hit that subscribe button, notification bell. Help keep this thing going. Still time to grab some of my books if you need a Christmas present for somebody who is into the supernatural. I don't recommend my books if somebody has no interest. We're not trying to convert people, but if someone was like, boy, I wonder if there's life after death, and you can be like, well, here's a book that explores the objective evidence of life after death. So you can still grab that at the afterlifetopics.com website, or get involved in the classes, become a patron if you want to help see this work continue to grow. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you guys on the next video.